Hello, and welcome to my own personal hellscape. Sorry that these are like uneven and shit. I put these up in a manic rage 6 months ago, and honestly I really have beef with like levelers and measuring tapes. I don't like them. They don't like me. I have forever wanted to do video essays, and I think I'm having like the mid-20s existential crisis situation, and so like the least I can get out of that is starting a video essay channel, because I have so many opinions about everything, as anyone who knows me knows, and I like to voice them all the time. It's very white woman of me, but you have to know your roots, frankly. As I studied more and more art history, I realized that one of my biggest passions in life is to ruin people's favorite artists. And because we don't really talk about art much, usually the only artists that people know of are people like Dalí, Picasso, like Michelangelo. It's a very like Western European art canon, right? So pretty much everyone you've heard of within the art space is like probably a really horrible person. There's a lot of nefarious activities. These are sick and twisted people. Because art, for the most part, was almost always, again, in the West, huge caveat, in the West, art was almost always just consumed by rich people, right? So then you have to think, what do rich people want to see? It's not good. It's not good stuff, guys. This can be a series that is tentatively titled Ruining Your Favorite Artist. Today, we are going to start with Dalí, because I know a lot of people really love that one painting with the melting clocks, which is called The Persistence of Memory. We're not going to talk about that a ton, and this won't be super heavy on the visual analysis aspect. It'll be a lot more about the societal conditions, the psychological conditions, and how that connects back to art that we consume today. So let's get into it. Before we talk about Dalí, we're going to have to talk about surrealism. And before we talk about surrealism, we have to talk about Freud. I'm so sorry to do this to you. And, before we talk about Freud, we have to talk about mommy issues. Freud's whole thing was just mommy issues, but he projected it onto everything. If you think about it, he was really one of the first podcast bros. Shout out misogyny. We're going to start with some Freudian basics, right? And don't worry, this is not a safe space for Freud. I am a hater of a lot of things, but especially Freud. I don't like how he's wormed his way into everything. It's really frustrating. It's the 1800s. He's doing research on hysteria. Hysteria was basically just when women would show emotions and they'd be like, you're the problem. That's where all of this comes from. It's like a big emphasis on biology. And obviously this is quite essentialist, but that is really the least of our problems at this point. The whole idea is like hysteria is repressed anxiety, fear, panic. In his 3 essays on the theory of sexuality in 1905, which was very controversial at the time, I will say, he comes up with these 5 phases of human growth and development. I'll put them all on the screen, but we're going to talk about phase 3, which is the phallic phase. He thinks that from ages 3 to 6, kids figure out that there are differences in genitalia. And this, in theory, is incredibly distressing. But basically he said, okay, so then girls develop envy and boys develop castration anxiety, which is all basically just around the claim that everyone wants a dick. Everyone wants a dick. The people who don't have dicks are heartbroken that they don't. And the people that do have dicks are terrified of them getting chopped off. Again, super normal things to be putting on 3-year-olds. Boys, as they realize they have a penis, are like, oh my God, this is the source of my masculine power. And you know who else has a penis? My dad. And again, age 3 to 6, Freud went, this is when boys are like, I have to compete with my dad to sexually possess my mother. So now that we've gotten a little bit of a Freudian thing out of the way, we're going to talk about we're going to set the scene. I'm setting the scene for you. It's the 1920s, World War I. Things are happening, right? Freud is kind of having his heyday. He's done his things. He's said his stuff. People are eating it up. People have been eating it up. So it starts with this dude, Andre Breton. I don't know how to pronounce these French names. So he learns about Freud in World War I, and he's super into it. He says, wow. He wrote his Surrealist Manifesto in 1924, and it was a combination of Freudian ideas, mainly ideas about the subconscious, and also Marxist ideas, right? Which is my favorite part of surrealism. He really didn't like the whole idea of like high European art, which real, fair. He was really into avant-garde stuff. And because Freud was super controversial at the time, Breton was like, yeah, I like that, I like that, I like that. It was a super male-dominated art movement. Again, shocker. Oh my God, that's crazy. I never would have guessed that. Most Western art movements were up until like the 70s, but surrealism especially, right? Because they just hated women. That was the whole thing. There were two different kinds of surrealism. We have biomorphic surrealism. This is like art and Miro, but we're not really going to talk about that. We're more going to talk about naturalistic surrealism, which is where we get to Salvador Dalí. Basically, it was combining very like recognizable scenes, images, objects, but through this lens of the subconscious. It was basically distorting and combining images to try and represent what Dalí felt like was his subconscious. So then what the is the subconscious? To be honest, it's really straightforward, and it's probably exactly what you are thinking. Basically, it's this idea that you can tap into your unconscious through things like dreams and a technique they called automatic drawing, which is supposed to pass by societal norms, societal beliefs, and find the expression of your involuntary mind. It's supposed to be ideas and feelings that are past what we can access with our conscious mind. Despite the fact that it is seen as being beyond logic, it is still used to validate certain kinds of logic, which we'll talk about a little bit later. To be honest, the idea of the subconscious is basically just a tool to be used to give power to certain ideas, to validate those kind of things and say, it's not wrong, it just may seem crazy to you because you're not enlightened like I am, you don't know this new psychology. And the concept was our subconscious is our true nature. Our subconscious is how we truly feel, how society truly is, right? Which in itself is so idiotic because you're just completely discarding context, right? If you have this man in his 20s who's been taught misogyny his whole life, and you have him going, well, you know, I dreamed about a woman being crazy because of her and going, well, I dreamed about it, so it must be true. That must be how things naturally are, is crazy. Like, it's subconscious doesn't mean it's without context. So they have this whole thing of like a paradoxical image. They're trying to replace a visual reality with an artist's manipulation of that reality. That concept you can see used really well in a lot of other spaces. Women, despite not being large players in the movement, were shown and depicted a lot. Women are shown as muses, which is a way to separate any sort of autonomy or intelligence of a woman by merely depicting her place as inspiration, mainly sexual inspiration. By using women and the image of women as just muses and symbols, you're showing women as inherently passive, but are also able to be the boss of how women are shown. Once women start depicting themselves, they become more nuanced. They become more than just an image that can be distorted, deformed, dismembered, or shown as body parts. And this is very often how women were shown in surrealism. So often, female bodies were shown to be these gross, distorted, dismembered things. Another big part of the visual and psychological language of surrealism is this idea of the uncanny. The uncanny basically is an object or concept that mixes fear and desire, which is pretty much exactly how women were viewed. I think what I also need to really emphasize is when I'm talking about surrealism, I'm talking about the movement. It is not just a set of aesthetic choices. Now, because we have so much more access to looking at so many different kinds of art, we tend to think of art movements as just aesthetic, and that is so not the reality, right? So surrealism isn't just the aesthetic of kind of weird, warped stuff. Surrealism is based in a set of ideas that lent itself to those aesthetics. And like many art movements, surrealism had a slew of visual metaphors that were very prevalent. Of these main symbols were ants, in many cases used to represent decay. Another big one was the praying mantis. Dalí loves a praying mantis, and by loves, I mean hates. If you don't know much about bugs, here's some animal fun facts. One thing about me, I'm going to find a way to put some animal fun facts into anything I'm doing. A female praying mantis beheads and eats the male. And this is during or right after sex. And it is a way for the female praying mantis to establish power over the male. But this was the exact representation of what women would do with autonomy if they had the chance. And so the praying mantis becomes a huge symbol in the art movement. Now that we've talked a little bit about surrealism, we have to talk about He was born in Catalonia, Spain in 1904. He had a brother before him that was also named Salvador Dalí that died when he was 9 months old. And then his parents were like, fuck. So then they had another kid and named him also Salvador Dalí. So he was kind of born into like this weird identity crisis. Then his mom died of uterine cancer when he was 16. So again, we're building up this animosity towards and uteruses and female genitalia. So the seeds are being sowed. The seeds are being planted. His dad apparently showed him photos of venereal diseases at a young age, again, adding to that fear, which I'll be honest, I had to look up venereal diseases because I was like, I've heard of this and I have no idea. I don't know why I thought it was something with like teeth. No, it's just STIs. It's like old people talk for STIs. But the problem with Dalí is that he's a huge liar. Like, he was known for being a liar. So a lot of what we know about him, unless we know it from other sources, is like, take it with a giant grain of salt because this man was insane. He was crazy. And he was the most like egotistical, egomaniac that you've ever heard in your life. A lot of what we know about him is from his autobiography. But the only reputable things that we know about Dalí are from other people because this man literally was allergic to the truth. It's kind of giving like Kanye, like, I'm just gonna say something and see if it sticks because he wanted attention. He was very much of the all press is good press mindset, which bad press is bad press. We're going to go into just a couple little fun facts that Dalí claims. So he claims that he has intrauterine memories. At 5, he pushed a boy off of a bridge. At 6, he kicked his sister's head as though it had been a ball. That's a quote from him. Which, like, listen, I get it, wanting to kick a sibling. I bit my sibling as a kid, and they had bite marks for days afterwards. But this feels a little different. I never pushed a boy off of a bridge. At 29, he trampled a girl because she commented on the beauty of his feet, which there's no way that happened. There's no way that happened at all. First of all, Who's going up to someone and being like, yo, you got some nice dog? Apparently people had to pull him off of her because she was bleeding so much. He was kicked out of university. He was kicked out of the Paris Surrealist group because he got super fascist. And again, it's like, we don't even know if he really was fascist, but at that point it doesn't matter. He was just saying shit. He got to a point where he said, you know what, let's use the F word, fascism. He was kicked out of this Paris Surrealist group for being a political. You know, that says something. Being kicked out of a group that's like known for being super misogynistic, that's bad. He was too much of a misogynist for the misogynistic group. That's tough. He apparently made cocktails out of his own blood. He was a self-proclaimed necrophiliac. All of these are things he wrote in his own autobiography. So he said he was into dead people, like he said he was really into poop, actually a shitty person. Super into animal cruelty. He had, supposedly, a pet ocelot named Babu that I don't know, I think it was just for attention, I guess. Another part of his whole animal cruelty thing is he collaborated with this guy named Philippe Halsman to make a photo called Dalí Atomicus. But it took 28 attempts. In this, he threw 3 cats in the air and flung water on them every time. 28 times. Like I said, super into animal cruelty. He was such a menace of a human being that in 1930, his dad wrote his friend a letter begging him to tell Dalí to stop seeing his parents. Literally, one of the lines from said letter is, "My son has no right to embitter my life." His dad said that. He was like, I don't even want to talk to my son. I'm telling his friend to tell him. He was a big Hitler fan, which sounds crazy to say, but he was a Hitler fan. He talked a lot about this dude named Francisco Franco. He described him as the hero of Spain. This is like a crazy genocidal dictator who was responsible for like 200 to 400,000 deaths. One of my favorite things that Dalí did, and this is like really one of the only things that I stand behind him on, was he was super into fraud, right? Super into fraud. And he would work with people who produced fakes and gave them his signature and flooded the art market with fakes of his own signature and his own art, which I think is hilarious. Him trolling in that way, I love. The rest of it, bad. Hate it, hate it, hate it, hate it. And it's funny because a lot of people who went to school with him described him as someone who was like really shy. And I just realized my pinky's up this whole time. Okay, classy. It just feels natural. People describe him as like shy, which is crazy. But that just kind of goes to show like all of this is a character, right? And he's finding ways to be dramatic. And I think he felt that if he created this character, he would be able to share and make art about these deep, like, fears of his, which were totally misogynistic, in a way that felt probably less intimate and less revealing about himself. So that was kind of Dalí's thing, except for he just took that way too far. You know, you can create a character without saying you like f***ing dead people. You know, I don't think I'm allowed to say that on YouTube. Probably not. I should look up what I'm allowed to say on YouTube because I'm sure necrophilia is probably frowned upon. There are a fair amount of paintings that I'm just realistically not going to be able to show, but I will put up a list of artworks that I do think you should Google and check out because the ones that I can't show are a lot of the ones that prove these points and solidify these ideas the most. One of the main paintings we're going to talk about is called Atavism at Twilight, or Obsessional Phenomenon. This was painted in 1933-1934 by Dalí. In this painting, you can see 2 main figures. There's a lot of red, and we're in a very desolate landscape. You probably know that Dalí loves a desolate landscape. I think a lot of times it stands in for his expression of loneliness. You can see that there is a assumed to be male figure on the left and a female figure on the right. The female figure is bowed down with her head and her hands clasped, possibly praying. This is supposed to be the position that the female praying mantis takes as she's about to So, although it may not seem like it is a reference to praying mantises, it very much is. You can also see in the way that the male figure has no head, has no human head, he only has a skull. This is a reference to the beheading of the male praying mantis during sex. And you can also see that he has a hole where his heart would be. This painting, I feel like, really shows the male figure as a victim of this woman's cruelty. And we get that through the connection to the grasshopper, but it is shown in a more subliminal way because you see the woman in a much more submissive position. And I think in a lot of ways, this is showing that a woman is dangerous and there should be fear around her and her body, even when she seems to be subordinate. This aligns very well with what we have been talking about through Freudian theories and also just surrealism as a movement. Another interesting thing that I feel is important is the hat that the male figure is holding. The top of it is painted in a very way. And I know you're like, Jesse, that is so nitpicky. But when I tell you that male painters love to make an object into, I'm telling you, it's always purposeful. And I think in this case is a show of supposed weakness and not heeding this Freudian warning of equal bad. So because the male figure on the left is holding something that is vaguely, the assumptions that come with the being projected onto him. The next painting we're going to look at is called The Great Masturbator or The Great Masturbator from 1929. And oh my gosh, I feel like I'm going to have to censor this. I don't even know how I'm supposed to go about this. There's a lot going on, and a lot, again, that is usually written off as, oh, this is just ridiculous and warped and strange. No. All the way on the farthest left, we see this, again, desolate landscape. We see this individual man. This, I believe, to be another show of Dalí's loneliness, and loneliness that is caused by the conditions of society and the conditions of women around him. As we go right, we see this giant warped head. A lot of people read this as being Dalí's head, which I am not opposed to, but it looks like he is asleep, which is definitely a nod to the role of sleep and dreams in subconscious. You can see underneath the face, right near the mouth, is a praying mantis. Guys, it's back. You're like, Jesse, that kind of looks like a grasshopper. Okay, but it is also a praying mantis. Sorry, I don't make the rules, but I do. This is my YouTube channel. We have a praying mantis over his mouth. In many ways, that could be seen as trying to silence him. And just the proximity of a praying mantis near his head really invokes the story of a praying mantis being violent and trying to decapitate him. On his face, an image of a lion with its tongue out and its teeth. And a lot of folks interpret this to be a symbol or a reference to vagina dentata, which is a very common folklore that is spread across many, many cultures, which is a myth of containing teeth and usually victimizes men. There's almost always a male hero that breaks the teeth and therefore controls female sexuality. The fact that this lion is so close to one of the only very clearly female figures in the painting makes sense, feels quite straightforward. Another symbol that's right next to the woman is a flower. Whenever there's a flower and a man painted it, he's talking about. And this is right next to a woman who is like nuzzling up to a guy's. And we can see this is a pretty aggressive show of what is thought to be the inherent female condition of envy. She is longing for whoever's this is. And there definitely is an element of sexuality, but I see it more as Dalí trying to show that he has what you as a possible female viewer want. Despite him being like incel adjacent, we're going to talk about the one woman who he like ever really was with. It's said that he was a virgin until he met her, which I 100% believe. Gala, I'm going to call her Gala just because it sounds bougier. Gala Dalí is a character for sure. If he had set out to find like his equal match of like for his partner, he did a good job. She was born in 1894, so was a decade older than him. They met in 1929, so Dalí was 25, I believe, and she was 35. She had been married once before to another dude who was in surrealism. She's married to this guy named Paul Eluard. A kid together. She's like, you know what? This kind of sucks. Abandons her child. Then she starts f***ing Max Ernst, who is another guy in surrealism. She's really just homie hopping through surrealism. She's having this like love affair with Max Ernst, and then she meets Dalí. So they met when Dalí was having a bout of madness, right? And they say women have hysteria. What? This gallery owner who was supposed to be showing his stuff was like, I'm worried he's not going to get all his paintings done. And he said, you know who's the woman for the job? Gala. So Gala comes in and whoops Dalí into shape. Right? So he finishes his paintings and he all of a sudden has a mother figure. Isn't it crazy how it always comes back to mommy issues? I told you. And so she's having this kind of love triangle with Dalí and Ernst at the same time, both like huge figures in surrealism. She ends up kind of just like being like, no, I think Dalí's my guy, right? And Gala and Dalí get married. Their relationship was crazy. She is kind of an insane person. She was described as cruel, fierce, and small, right? She was known for her horniness and how little she respected everyone. Those were like her two key features, right? Which honestly, I'm not that mad at. I'm kind of okay with that actually. One of the tales that people would tell about her was that she used to burn cigarettes on the arms of people she didn't like and spit on them. So that's the woman Dalí married. And he basically married a mom. He basically married a motherly figure. She was like huge momager vibes. We're talking Kris Jenner here. Even though she wasn't his mom, she was basically his mom. And would just like manage all of his art stuff. Dalí started signing both of their names as his signature a year after they met. And it's funny because Dalí, having all these mommy issues, having all this hatred and fear of and women, ends up marrying the exact manifestation of those fears. And in those ways, he is able to live out this Freudian Oedipus complex of f***ing his mom. If we go back to the phallic phase, 3 to 6 year olds, part of it is when boys realize they have a penis, they then compete with their dad for like sexual ownership of their mom. He is fulfilling that prophecy by marrying Gala Dalí. But the thing about Gala, that's an independent woman right there. She has no interest in being claimed. In fact, it's kind of the exact opposite. It's very mommy dom vibes. They had a very strange sex life. Mainly strange because we know about what a weirdo Dalí was. Let's just say that there was a chair in their home, 100%. Dalí, one of his big things is he wouldn't have with his wife. Gala would have men over and have with them and have Dalí watch. Again, which is this wild manifestation of this powerlessness that he has shown for so long. So he kind of lives in this strange in-between where he's not full incel, but he has those same beliefs, puts himself in spaces to prove those beliefs correct. Right. Something also interesting about Gala is she had a hysterectomy because she had cystic fibrosis. I think that there's probably a connection of the fact that she has a hysterectomy and has her uterus removed. That probably removed a certain amount of fear around her genitalia that Dalí had. because he believed that hysteria is coming from the vagina, and obviously she still had her vagina, but men don't really know about anatomy like that, so I wouldn't be shocked if Dalí was like, well, part of her vagina is gone. And their relationship was really interesting because Dalí is this larger than life character, but you can really see him as this like kind of small scared boy in their relationship because she was the one in control. Dalí was in this constant search to make this character of his own, but Gala didn't have to do that. She was already like that. Dalí had to make up his own stories. Gala didn't. Also, Gala is said to have looked a lot like Dalí's mom, which none of us are surprised, right? This is like the most straightforward Oedipus cluster, right? Dalí, despite claiming to want control, did not want control. Gala wanted control. And because Dalí had been rejected by his family, again, I say this with no empathy or sympathy. He did that to himself. Let's be clear. But because he's rejected by his family, he is looking for acceptance, is looking for a place to be. And Gala was that. They were married and they were lovers. Ew. But it was literally just a mom and son relationship, which again, after we've learned all of this about Freud and surrealism and Dalí, this is making sense, right? This very interesting connection to incel culture, because I think we can look at surrealism and Dalí and be like, okay, whatever, this was 100 years ago. Why is this relevant? Why do we care about this? Other than the fact that it is a crazy story. So I fear a lot of you watching this probably already know what an incel is, and also I don't want to talk about incel psychology that much. So we're just going to do a super brief overview. Incel stands for involuntarily celibate. Basically, it's a group of men who don't get any, they have no game, they get no play. And instead of looking inward and being like, wow, maybe I'm just the worst, they blame women for their romantic failures. They believe in this idea of a social hierarchy based on appearance and that women are born with value because of their looks and their sexuality, whereas men have to do a lot more work because they are not born with the same level of attractiveness and therefore value that women have. Despite the fact that he had a wife, he was being cocked that whole relationship. Honestly, I wouldn't even be shocked if they barely had sex. Like, that would totally make sense. The basis of the incel identity is insecurity, fear, and anxiety. Dalí was the epitome of all three. He was so insecure in his masculinity that he became terrified of femininity. The idea that women's rights have come at the cost of men's rights, which is one of the base beliefs of the manosphere, is what surrealists were scared of. They were terrified that if women had any semblance of independence or autonomy, that they would take advantage of it and create a social reality. That is exactly the world that people like Clavicular, Andrew Tate, Myron Gaines, and other members of the manosphere believe in. What defines Dalí and incels specifically within this group is their overwhelming fear and anxiety. The terror they feel surrounding women's bodies is especially palpable and creates this very unique brand of misogyny. This is where the uncanny comes into play. Incel culture and surrealism both teach an intertwined fear and desire of women's bodies in a way that links them together very closely. The difference between the two is merely a matter of time. Dalí, at the time, had very little pushback on his views. The manosphere is based on being an anti-feminist movement, but feminism, as we know, didn't exist then. So the character of an incel as a countercultural figure didn't have to exist. However, I do believe that if Dalí lived in today's world, he would be an incel, or at the very least be part of the manosphere. I think there's a lot of debate on where the rhetoric from the manosphere and of incels has come from. And although it has taken a sharp uptick with internet culture and the widespread availability of online communities, this kind of rhetoric has always been around. These kinds of ideas have always been around. It has just taken this late stage capitalism that we exist in to truly evoke the full extent of it. Incels today consider themselves to be some of the only awakened ones, which is the entirety of what being a red pillar is. You believe you are enlightened and others aren't. This is incredibly similar to how surrealists felt about the subconscious, that they were the enlightened ones and everyone else were merely sheep in society who hadn't gotten to the intellectual level that they had. And to be honest, it could get worse. I don't know what the future looks like. This uncanny misogyny could continue much further than it is now. I don't disagree that your subconscious and your dreams are an interesting way to learn about yourself. I think where a lot of this goes wrong is assumed that your subconscious and what your subconscious comes up with is inherently natural. And this is just such a simplified way to think about things. And it's also an assumption that your subconscious is this like natural raw resource that has been the exact same since you were a child. And that's not true. That's not true. Our subconscious is not this untapped, pure thing. Our subconscious is completely shaped by our experiences, by how people speak to us, by how we see the world exist around us. So when people in surrealism are like, hey, I had this dream about beating my wife, and go, you know what? Because that's how my subconscious felt, this much must be the natural order. It's like you just skipped a few steps there. No, you had a dream about beating your wife because you've been raised in a misogynistic culture that taught you that violence towards women isn't just okay, it's actually necessary. As I briefly said before, the subconscious is used as a mechanism to amplify some forms of power and to compress others. When women have subconscious ideas, artistic interpretations, feelings, it's seen as crazy, insane, psychotic. But when men reach into their quote unquote subconscious and come out with ideas about society, they are inherently correct. So the idea of the subconscious is mainly wielded as a weapon to validate some forms of power and invalidate others. In the same way that we as people, especially as white people, like to discount the way that we are influenced by the world around us. Because you are raised in a misogynistic society, you internally are probably a little misogynistic. Because we are raised in a white supremacist society, you are racist. Deep down, there's a little bit in there. That's where the importance of thinking about these things and unpacking these things are. And we can look at Dalí as this character and find him, disgusting and maybe a little funny and ridiculous. But this is an archetype of a human that still exists, right? Even though this was 100 years ago, him projecting his fear of women and fear of and saying, oh no, it's my subconscious. It's my subconscious, so it must be okay. Right? It must be rational. It must be logical. Even though the whole idea of the subconscious was that it didn't have to be rational and logical, the subconscious was still used as a way to rationalize things. So it's like this weird, what the doesn't make sense. All of this is to say, Dalí was a freak. I know that he's probably one of the only artists that most people can name. Listen, the drippy clocks, kind of fun, kind of cool. But once you know the psychology behind it, it gets a little more worrisome. So anyways, that's what I have to say. I hope that you have enjoyed me ruining one of your favorite artists, and I look forward to continue to do so. Let me know if there's any specific people. I really love doing social commentary. I really love art history, and I really love hating on men. So this is kind of a combination of all of those interests. And as we end the video, I leave you with one of Dalí's most poetic sentiments. Talent and creative power are located in the testicles. Without them, one cannot create. I'll see you next time.